Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today we'll be discussing site design and project planning using the grading optimization tool in Civil 3D 2022. My name is Kyle Groves. I'm an EIT and a senior technical specialist with ATG USA, and I'm really excited about today's topic. Before that, however, let me just give you a little bit more background about myself. I am a senior technical specialist with ATG out of our Bloomington, Minnesota office. I'm in St. Paul myself these days. And I'm a Civil 3D certified professional. I'm an Autodesk certified instructor. And of course, I'm also an EIT certified in Wisconsin. My product expertise is in AutoCAD, Civil 3D, storm and sanitary analysis, and InfraWorks, all of our core Civil 3D engineering, civil engineering software inside the Autodesk environment. Been with ATG for coming on 4 years now, and I've got another 3 years of project experience before that, mostly solid waste and land development, a little bit of site design, residential and commercial. So with that, let's get into our agenda for today. I'm going to go through a quick overview of our Civil 3D grading tools that we have available to us out of the box. I'm assuming that most of us already have that information, so I won't be going in detail or discussing it very thoroughly inside of the software, but I will provide that background as a review. With those fundamentals, we'll be talking about Civil 3D feature lines, we'll be talking about Civil 3D grading objects, and we're going to get into these advanced tools that we're here to really discuss today on those grading optimization on that grading optimization workflow, rather. I'll be using a commercial site example, though there's definitely ways that we can use this for residential subdivisions or other more land development workflows. I know the Autodesk official promotional content for this goes through a really big commercial site, and they do some roadwork stuff and the rest of that. So with that, getting into things, we've got our Civil 3D feature lines and our Civil 3D grading objects. So these are tools that have been available for a very, very long time inside of the software. I've been using it since 2014, version 2014, and I've always seen these up in my ribbon. So with Civil 3D feature lines, these are everywhere inside the software. They're not only inputs for stuff like our Civil 3D surfaces, but they're also outputs from things like our Civil 3D corridor toolset. They're really easy to manipulate. You can do them all over, select all of your feature lines, pick them up by a little bit, and you can do really specific local edits to individual points along that feature line. Also, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video, so give a little bit more of that real estate back to the screen for the recording. But the feature lines, they're really easy to manipulate, and they should be used as our primary definition for proposed surfaces whenever we're doing site design. Of course, Civil 3D corridors have some real power to giving us our proposed surface as well as our datum surface for the bottom of our engineered materials. But certainly, if you were to ask me, I think everybody that's doing any sort of proposed site design work in Civil 3D should know how to use feature lines at an intermediate level. And the days are over where we're offsetting polylines to define our Civil 3D surfaces. Now, grading objects, these are another advancement on that same tool set, on that same workflow. So with a grading object, you start with a parent feature line. Maybe it's a curb gutter or a top back of curb. Maybe it's a basin high water level. But what you're doing is you're automatically offsetting these child feature lines based on whatever user input. So you're building some sort of a concentric offset with a closed feature line, or you can certainly do that with a linear feature line as well. But one master, and then you're working outward with different sets of rules. The cool thing about this is that it will dynamically update your child feature line if the parent feature line changes. And it's also pretty great at tying in a proposed feature to another surface. I'll be referring to this concept as daylighting today. Some people like to call it runout. A lot of different terms for it, but eventually we need to connect back to our design. Also, our grading objects automatically add those collections of feature lines to our surface. Another things these tools do really well is creating disconnected islands of different proposed data. However, grading objects are famously unstable over the long term. I've dealt with many a support case at my time here at ATG where the story goes, yeah, I was working on my proposed feature set. I was working with those grading objects. I went for some coffee. I came back and half of my surface just disappeared in a puff of digital smoke. And my feature lines are all gone, and now I got to start all over again. So We're not going to get into much more on these tools than that. If you'd like to know more about Civil 3D feature line basics, more mitigation strategies with feature lines and grading object, or with our grading objects rather, check out my Autodesk University class from 2019 called Feature Lines, Best Practices and Advanced Workflows. Just search up Groves in the AU library, and that should pop up. A lot of great stuff in there. So ultimately, with our feature lines, these are fundamental. They're everywhere in Civil 3D. We need to know how to use them. They're powerful editing to address a variety of needs, and it's important for everybody to know how to use those. Grading objects are tools that are free. They're reasonably intuitive, and they do function as advertised. You also have a limited ability to solve for your earthwork balance, and that's part of why we're here today. I should not have buried this lead quite so far, but the really cool and interesting thing about our Civil 3D grading optimization tools is that we're now allowed to use our earthwork balance as inputs for our workflow. So we get to say, yeah, I'd really like to have 20% cut or 30% fill. We don't have to use that as an input, but that's part of the attractiveness of using this tool. And our grading objects have a limited ability to include that. Now, our grading objects do have a tolerable workflow for daylighting. And with them, the automation is tied to the resultant feature lines. If you do update the master, you need to do that manually, but all the rest of those changes do push through to the children. Again, they're very unstable. It's easy to lose work, and the countermeasures do exist, but they're still kind of risky to use. They're better than nothing, though, for sure. That's our overview on the tools that we already have available for use inside Civil 3D. There's plenty of different workflows that ATG and our partners have promoted over the years for how to use those for site design. We're not going to get too deep into that today. Instead, we're going to now spend the rest of our time talking about grading optimization. I don't expect to use the full hour today, but we'll see how things go once we get into Civil 3D. So with grading optimization, it's a brand new tool for Civil 3D 2022. And I'm actually going to hop over to my Autodesk Manage page where we can see where we can get this downloaded. But basically, it's an add-on that exists outside of the software for Civil 3D 2022. So it's going to be a separate install. We're going to find that in our Civil 3D Analyze ribbon. And what it does is it operates as an iterative design tool. So we're going to develop a set of prioritized constraints. So we're going to set up where our outer boundary for our whole site is, where we have to stop and daylight and come in there. But then what's more important? Is it more important for our accessibility paths to be designed first, or is it more important for our curb islands to be developed first? We have full control over that, and that hierarchy is a concept that's very common in Civil 3D. We see that in our point groups. We see that in our surface build order from our definition tab. So definitely something that we're used to seeing. We're going to go through and we're going to already have to have 2D work laid out for us inside of our site. We'll be tagging those various features to be recognized by grading optimization. So we'll specifically call something out as a building pad, something as our parking lot area. Then we're going to assign those rules. So we get to do maximum and minimum slopes. We get to talk about different height offsets for our curbs. And then ultimately, we get to also choose that target site balance for our cut and for our fill. Then we're going to go through and we're going to optimize it all within this kind of external Civil 3D software. And we're going to go through that. Now, real quick, just in case you missed it, this is my Autodesk Manage page, manage.autodesk.com. All of our CAD managers are going to go here, and depending on your permissions at your firm, you may be able to come in here too. But you're going to find grading optimization under your product updates tab, where you'll then go through. I always recommend just hop straight over to the filters in the top right corner. And I'm going to be looking for version 2022. And for my software itself, actually has its own checkbox these days, so I didn't even need the filter for the version. But you'll go find your Civil 3D grading optimization, give that a download. We actually have had a update to the base toolset that came out a few weeks ago. So even if you do have this already, consider checking out the update. You'll get that installed through the standard workflow, zip file to your C drive, extract it, install it, and then you'll be able to run with it. So what is this going to look like inside Civil 3D? Well, we're going to get a brand new tool palette tab for all of this stuff. So I've already reconfigured mine that it's going to show up a little differently than usual, but you'll find it in your tool palette, and it will be persistent throughout your user interface through that tool palette. A couple of different pieces of data we have available through grading optimization. Number one is our point data. Then so these are Civil 3D COGO points. We can use a COGO point to define a low point or to define a bounded point. I will cover a lot of these finer detail points, but this is definitely something, new tool, new workflows. Check the help documentation, get that detailed info, and just take a few minutes to check out your tooltips. Alternatively to point data, we then have linear data that we can run through here. So key things that we're going to be looking at today are our curbs, and then our drain lines. We've got a couple of other different types of data that we can use here. So aligned edges and bend lines, just kind of say like, how do we want our surfaces to flow with their tin lines as they cross certain features? And then our reveal, this is what you would use to put together like a loading dock or a loading cutout for a parking lot and a commercial property. Won't be doing that today, but the Autodesk What's New videos do a pretty good job at showing that workflow off. And then lastly, we have our area data. And these areas do have a lot in common together. Ultimately, they're pretty much all permutations of this zone concept. So we're going to have some sort of a bounded polyline, a building pad, our grading limits, sort of a detention basin. And then a lot of these are just predefined depth and slope criteria. So our accessible paths are going to show up with like a 1 to 2%, whereas our sidewalks and our parking lots might show up with a defaulted 1 to 5% for some of those different things. Basins, those do get treated a little differently. We'll check that out too. But that's what you're going to go through. You're going to have your 2D line work all put together for your site, and then you'll use grading optimization to kind of check that out. And it's also important to note, we'll cover some of the things that happened or didn't happen at the end of this workflow, but right now, grading optimization is very effective as a planning tool, as understanding what some of your limits are. I would not ask you to expect whatever comes out of here to be 100% ready to go for your final design. So we'll cover some of those things as we get through, but this is now the workflow. Once we get through this, we'll be a bit inside of the software for the duration of the webinar. So number one, we need to define those site limits for our grading. So this might be our exact property line. We might offset that and come in for 5 feet. But wherever those are, we need to tell grading optimization where we have to tie in daylight. Once we're done with that, we're going to establish zones. So we're going to do this through all the 2D geometry that we already have. Detention basin outlines, curb and gutter lines, building pads, ADA parking areas, all that type of stuff. We're going to now go through and tag that with our grading optimization data. Then we're going to determine any of our drain lines or our low points. A couple of interesting things about working with those. Ultimately, we're always drawing from high to low with line work in this tool set. Then we're going to go through and just confirm all of those settings. What are our depths? What are our slope constraints? Then we'll run through the optimize interface. This is what we find in our Civil 3D Analyze ribbon tab with our new grading optimization panel. It's going to launch a separate dialog, a separate software where we can go through, we can disable any unwanted components, we can organize our zones. That hierarchy bottom is the most important. And as we go up, we're saying this is less or this is more dependent data. And how you have those ordered will affect how the tool does its solution. Confirm the rest of your options, and then simply go through and optimize. The tool is going to go through, we'll watch all of those iterations, some of the different animations, so we can keep track of whether or not this is going well. And then we're going to take that and we're going to send it back to Civil 3D. Now, this is not going to be all of the break lines and a perfectly manipulatable stuff. This is going to be a land XML import into your Civil 3D design. So part of the question is how much of that can we trust? How much of that do we want to go back and remanipulate? But we're going to get that into our Civil 3D surface, into our model rather, and we'll be able to manipulate it. We'll also be able to confirm any of those insertion settings. So with that, we're going to hop in to Civil 3D, check out this tool set. All right, so here I am inside Civil 3D. I have a little commercial site. Let's see, how big is this? Where did my properties palette go? It is gone. Let's bring that back. So we're looking at 2.5-ish acres for all of this site. So small as far as some sites go. I mean, this would be a little big for a gas station, a little small for some other commercial sites. But we've got double access, one on the west face, one on the south face. We have a detention basin that we need to deal with, a couple of accessible spaces, curb islands, parking, all that jazz. And then our building is on the north side of the lot. And we may or may not find excuses to grade over here. We could use this green boundary polyline for our area of extents, or we could use basically our offset property line for those extents as well. And so with this, all of this that I have selectable right now is a 2D AutoCAD object. It's either a hatch, well, those aren't going to be used. That's my ADA stuff, but I've got lines, hatches, and polylines. No Civil 3D data in here yet. This tool is going to handle all of that for me. So I'm going to now hop over to my Civil 3D Analyze ribbon, where on the far right side, we're going to now see this grading optimization panel. So for this interface, our grading objects themselves, this is our ability to go through and tag the actual data inside my design. So this cyan line is a polyline representing where I want my drainage area to be. This is like my only pre-configured grading object type data. I can now use the grading objects, and really this is our main tool palette that we're interfacing with here. I can use this to say, all right, well, I've got my object selected. I want to tag this as a drain line. As soon as I tag this as that grading object data, a couple of things are going to happen. My grading object data palette is now going to come up, and I get to name this thing, play around with slope and depth parameters, and just kind of define this the way that I want it to be. And then this lower thing, I'll sketch that out in orange, is going to be my grading objects browser. So once I have this data defined, I'll now be able to come back and review that data for the grading object information specifically. So at this point, I'm going to go through and I'm going to establish all of the two-dimensional line work as inputs for my grading optimization tool set. So first things first, I'll just finish that drain line. Again, with your drain lines, you're going to want to draw those. Your first vertex is your high point. Your second vertex is your low point. AutoCAD Civil 3D is going to recognize the directionality of that, and that's what it's going to be using ultimately for us. So next up, let's start defining our zones. So the first thing I want for my zone is I can just choose an actual zone, and that's kind of my flexible option, or I can use one of these pre-configured limits. So I'm going to go with a grading limit, and I am going to choose my outside daylight line. I did chamfer that corner. That was simply a choice that I didn't want to deal with the fillet. That has no impact on the tool itself. But once I do that, I'm just using the Z character at the front of most of my stuff for some alphabetical sorting. Whatever convention you do decide on for naming this, pick a convention and stick with it. It's far more important to have a plan than whether or not that plan is a good plan or a less good plan. So grading object, site boundary is my only one that I'm dealing with. And now I get to start worrying about my various constraints. So I can bound it based on custom data. So, hey, I'm in green space. I've got good soil types. So I can use a 33% maximum, and it's really hard to get grass any flatter than 2%. So that's for this one. However, I can also define global constraints for my model, and I could just use those. Alternatively, I can give it no slope constraints and let the tool run and treat this the way that it would like. I do have some different options as far as like aligning my surface, whether it's exclusive drainage or whether it has a direction for that inclination. For these, I'm going to simply refer to you to click on the I button, read the help documentation, read the tool tips, and just continue to follow along with me here for the rest of today. So the other thing that is important for my zone, for my exclusion zone though, is I do want this to be my grading limit. So I'm going to toggle that radio button on, and this is a break line. So I want my tin lines to follow this line work, just like a survey figure, just like any other traditional Civil 3D break line. You can recolor this data, though by default, it should be looking at the actual layer for that. And that's how we're going to define our exclusion zone. I'm going to come through here and now start defining out the rest of my properties. So I'll just create a generic zone for the object representing the kind of the soft grading limits for my site, where I wanted to kind of stop doing extreme stuff and get ready to taper out to my daylight. So this is my site boundary number 2. Yeah, that works. For this, I'm going to continue to use custom slope constraints, still green space, still 33 and 2, although this is no longer my grading limit, so that is going to be dechecked, and I want to keep it with a with the break line. Now, other stuff that we can define here. So we have our global grading objectives. So we'll see this a little bit later inside the actual grading optimization tool, but this is asking us, all right, are we trying to use cut and fill as an input for this site? That is one of the major advantages. We don't have to use it, but heck yes, we definitely want that today. Minimizing earthwork just says, should I leave triangles alone if I can? In that case, generally, sure. Though I am afraid of this smooth surface command. If you go back and watch my AU class, or if you've seen it already, do a very practical demonstration of how this can really bloat your drawing from a data perspective. So I'll leave it on for now, but this is definitely worth going back to, or at least dialing down the overall smoothing factors inside the grading optimization workspace. So once we've tagged that information, I can see I've got drain lines, grading limits, and the one zone over here in my grading objects browser. As soon as I go back and select that data inside Civil 3D, it's automatically going to recognize, hey, this is one of my grading objects, and it's going to also pop up this zone properties dialog. Now, I am working on one single monitor today for my demonstration. You're going to want 2 monitors at least for going through this workflow. It's going to get a little crowded. I'm going to try and mitigate that, but I'm very fond of my properties palette, so I'll just auto hide that for now. Next up, let's start doing, let's do our detention basin, see how that works. So we do have a specific pond object, and I said most of these zones are kind of pre-configured, but we could just make a regular zone out of it anyway. Use the pond for the pond information. So I've just got, that's supposed to represent my high water level. I'm going to select the polyline. I'm going to choose it. We do have some extra stuff in here. So we can determine, am I going to be a dry pond or am I going to be a wet detention basin? That will help impact the various calculations. We have an opportunity to define what our storage volume is. So if you've already gone through and done that, well, okay, commercial site, 80% impervious, maximum storm, just do those back of the envelope calculations and you can start to type those in. So for a site like this, 2.5 acres, blah, blah, whatever, I think that I might want 48,000 cubic feet. And I'll dial that max depth up to maybe 8 to kind of see how the tool is going to get there. If the tool thinks that it needs more space, it may make it bigger if you allow it to. You can also have it design that safety bench for you, and note that even though this is in here, as soon as I toggle some of these, I might see different options in here. So for that safety bench, we get to say what's the depth, width, and slope representing that. So I'll say you're going to be 1 foot deep, you're going to be 5 feet wide, and you are going to have a 10% slope. Sorry, those numbers do not match. You're going to be a 1/2 foot deep, and 5 feet wide and 10% slope. That's better. Or I could turn it off. Also, we do have auto berming calculations. So a lot of times if you are filling, you need to berm back up to give yourself that 1 foot of freeboard. Whereas if you're in a cut condition, your freeboard requirements can go down from there. But berm width, we'll just leave those as are. We can simply modify them later if we need to. I'm going to define my building pad. I'll go ahead and use the predefined zone for that. It's asking me, I could have chosen multiple, should I want to. A lot of the rest of these, maybe with the exception of the ADA accessible stuff, are now pretty straightforward. So for our elevation, we can force it to a fixed elevation, or we can force it to a range that we want it to stay within. And we can also make it be at a flat elevation, and we can just type that in now. I want this to float, so I am going to come back to those options later, though I do want it to be level. I could allow this to be unlevel if I was a little bit more preliminary. I'm going to want that to be flat for sure. And 1.5 foot deep for my building stuff. I'm not a structural engineer. I'm not going to bother changing that right now. but we could if we needed to. Next up are our accessible paths. Now, I did split this into two for this particular site because our actual walking path is usually more of the 2% to 5%, get away with an 8% for a very small distance if we absolutely have to. However, our parking lot, we're definitely going to want that to be half to 2% for our slopes. So if you have different slope constraints, you're going to need to use different areas to represent those. So now when I come into my accessible path, I'll start with my parking lot area, choose just that single line, and I will rename this ADA path park custom. For my max and min close, we'll go with 0.5 for that. I don't want to align this. I don't want it exclusive. I don't want a direction for that. I will have a depth of material representing my pavement depth, and everything else should look good here. Really just needed to change my drain slopes. Next up will be my path to get into the building. So I'll define that as an accessible path again. This time I can go with my max slope as a 5% and my minimum as a 0.5 again. Mostly pavement, mostly sidewalk. I'm going to just leave that depth. If I wanted to get really detailed, I could break this up into the area that's under the sidewalk versus the pavement, sidewalk again, sidewalk. So we'll let that go. I will rename this to walkway. Now, these green ones, there is a way that you can use these effectively. I have not quite figured out how to get it to execute the way that I want it to actually make that curb cut for me. But based on the research that I was doing, it should be a little bit past your curb line. And then you're going to want one per ramp direction, because when we come into our accessible path, now we have an opportunity where we're going to use this zone inclination declination direction. So the way that my AutoCAD units are set up in this drawing is that east or to the right, that's 0 degrees, and we're increasing in a counterclockwise direction. So if I want this ramp to go down to the south, that's the direction that I'm choosing, as I'm choosing the down direction, and that's going to be 270 degrees for me here today. This other path down here on the bottom for the curb cut, I'd probably just do that all flat. I have it listed out as 2 right now. So that inclination direction, oh, I need to repurpose those to be 8 max. Sure, we can go with 1 min. This inclination direction is north, that's 90. Final pad is also going to decline to the 270. And I will select both of those and update their max slopes to 8% as well. I think the last thing we need to do is our curb. Sorry, 2 more things: curb, then pavement area. So all these curb lines, pretty straightforward. I'll just select similar. So curbs can be both area data and linear data. The tool treats lines a little silly, so I might recommend doing a real brief offset and closing it. But I'm going to just go ahead and grab both of those. We will go to create the curb object, and we're just defining the height. It's as our graphic in tool space is showing us, it's a really simple curb geometry. We're not trying to get fancy. So if you need a different mountable than a barrier, then you might need 2 different regions. I'm going to go with my good old fashioned Minnesota B612, 1/2 foot tall, 1/2 foot wide. Those are good to go. And then the last thing is going to be my pavement parking area. Selection cycling to grab that one. So this was just a boundary polyline that I had created with my curb line work, with my site limits all put together. And it is living on its own layer. So I could have isolated it had I chosen. This is now going to get the parking lot type grading, which again is pretty straightforward. We've got our maximum slope, 1 to 5. I don't have any inclination or any of that type of stuff. And this is going to be a break line. So we should have all of those elements. We can come back to our grading object browser to confirm. I've got some ADA stuff. I've got a building, some drain lines. Oh, I want more drain lines. So I want this area to be a low point, and I want this area to be a low point, and my my stormwater might look a little bit like this with catch basins and then draining out into that basin. We need to add those drain lines. We do also need to remember, first click is the high point, second click is the low point. I'm just going to give myself a little circle centered between the center. So now I come in, polyline. Oh, I have a layer for this. I'll make that active. Drain lines, polyline. We're coming from the curb to the center, from the other curb to the center, from this curb to the midpoint, and that curb to the midpoint. Also, I do want to make sure that we're coming down from the south and from the north. So I'm going to put in at least one drain line from the south to the north. Get some extension stuff, come back. And yeah, we'll do that again up here. So this is going to help force those low points into my site. And now I can simply come back to my drain line and select all of those at once. Enter. Not a whole lot we can do about those other than say that direction is down. So I've got this all put together. Let's hop into the optimizer and see how this is going to roll. Come up to my Analyze tab, and I'm going to choose that optimization. Now, I am using InfoWorks controls. So right click is pan, left click is orbit, zoom in and out with your mouse wheel. And this is going to show me what my site is looking like. If I choose an individual element from the side, it's going to highlight that in space. It's also going to give me a chance to review any of those parameters. Because I put those together in Civil 3D already, I'm happy with them. I don't need to come through and modify them. So I will mention for our curbs, note that even though some of these were linear, the tool is closing those. So just keep an eye on that. It shouldn't cause major problems, but I do think this is going to give us a break line along that. It's still solving for other things, and it's going to move that break line up or down and with elevation points, but it will look a little silly in the optimizer interface. And the last thing, since we did so much of that in Civil 3D, that I will point out, when you're in here, you do have an opportunity to turn something on or off. And then you can also make it invisible using that little eye blink. So I like all of my content. I want to see it. I want it to be there. So I don't need to choose any of that. I will come into my zones though, and I'll kind of reorganize these. So my paving, yeah, it's 1 to 5%, but my parking lot for my ADA is way more important. So I'm gonna put that at the bottom of my list. I'll put my walkway after that. And then my building pad is already up there. So the tool is gonna use that the way that it wants to. So I've got my ADA ramp, and then I'm going to just move all of those over there, but I do want my site boundary to be kind of at the bottom. So bottom is most important, top is more dependent data on everything else that is going on. I'm happy with all these settings. I'm almost ready to run. Let's check out the bottom of this interface. So I've got my help, I've got basic about information, so you can check your updates. The preferences are where some of the stuff that we want to check out. So if we're refining the surface, that's fine. But based on the hardware specs of your computer, you're definitely going to want to check the mesh quality toggle. I am using one of ATG's BIMbox laptops. It is a very nice machine. I'll be able to get through this pretty quick on medium settings today. If you have triangle sizes, you can play with those too. You have a visualization toolbar. We'll see that as we're iterating. And then you have a convergence plot, which is going to show you how the iterations are going on. Ultimately, we want that to get stable out. And because we're using volumes as part of what we care about, we definitely want to keep an eye on our cut and fill chart, which may wave as our iterations change through there. So the optimization options are the big thing that we care about. So global constraints, what's our max, what's our min? Good soil, 33%. Minimum, 0.5%. Iterations, I'm going to drop 1 0 so that we can get to 10,000 instead of 100,000. That'll take a little bit too long. I do want to cut and balance my fill, and I do want to minimize my earthwork. And I'm going to turn down my smoothing to maybe 33. So now I am ready to optimize, which is just this little playhead down here. It's going to take a second to start moving, and let's see how the tool is going to behave. So we're going to use our visualization toolbar, launch it from the bottom left, check it out up here. So we can see our cut and our fills as they're going through here. We've got our slider on the right that has our greens and our reds and telling us what that all is. We can look at slope violations. So I said, hey, in my parking zone, I need this to be really, really flat. Well, most of the time it's respecting the flatness on an individual triangle basis, but it's going to show us how those are changing. So that's one way that we can look at it. Other ways we can look at it are with our themes. We can look at things by an elevation. We can look at things with, or just keep those bands constant, maybe make them grayscale, check out the different slopes with that legend again on our right. I haven't figured out what the aspect does, but it looks really pretty. And then for our topology, we can either be looking at contours, we can turn on or off our triangles. Let me go back to slopes for those. And then our hydrology is going to show us the flow arrows across here. So let me pick a little different perspective so that it can show us how this site is getting put together. It looks like we're going way high on that building or a little berm next to it. Our detention basin is clearly going down, but it's spread out a lot because of our safety shelf that I can see in there. Very wet basin. And then we're ultimately drain lining down to the northeast corner of our site. And it's just going to show us where this is all looking at. I will encourage you to pay attention to your building pad. I had set my practice one up previously as just a standard type zone, and it was having a really hard time making my pathway line up with the actual entrance of the door. And it looks like we are not really respecting that today either. So we'll want to find a way to bring that down, or if we have to force that elevation down later inside Civil 3D, we can. We're just gonna have to recalc our earthworks. So either way, looks like we've got a bit of a berm off to the left side of our building. We may want to mitigate that. We've got a detention basin. All of our low points are mostly happening to come down and converge, and we can see our slopes arrows as part of all of that. Now, I did not have this up earlier, but we have finished our optimization result. We can see how much oscillation there was. Ultimately, we want that to flatten out. We want that to get horizontal. Same thing for our terrain smoothness. And then throughout our iterations, this is how it claimed our stuff was going. And on this particular site, we are currently running 1, 2, 3, oh man, 35,000 cubic yards of fill. So that's a lot. We would want to iterate this more and change some of our other perspectives or our other parameters for it. But it's good enough for now. Let's go ahead and send this optimized result back into Civil 3D to see what we can do with it now and maybe clean it up or work with it. So for this optimization result, it's going to bring in the surface. It's going to bring in all of the feature lines that it used as part of that. And if I select each one of these components, it gives me some styling options. So definitely for your feature lines, make sure that you can call that a site that you want. So this is go result 1 FG from EG. Now, you don't have to use your actual surveyed existing surface for this. In the Autodesk promotional content workflows for this, they do 2 stages. They do mass grading for a really big box site. So they kind of just flatten everything out, and then they come back and they put in the parking lot and the drive-through and all that other kind of stuff later. So that intermediate surface was the comparison for the final build. And the survey existing was the comparison for the mass grading development of that site. I could choose my styles for all of these. And, we got options. I'll just leave that as my grading feature line for now. I don't have any points, so we don't have to worry about that. Let's finish. And now I can select Flop my tools palette to hide and my properties out. So here is my finished grade surface. I forgot to name that, silly me. But I could have. So there's my EG, there's my building surface, and now I can create a Civil 3D volume surface. I can run the elevation banding on that. Me, again, kind of flip or get my tool space out so we can work with this a little bit more. On those sites for my feature lines, select all. Let me save this. Always save before going into Object Viewer. I just want to check out these feature lines to see how they look. So I've definitely got the elevation coming in there. I can see how my curbs are being put together without the surface. I mean, it's a little more difficult to tell, but yeah, I've got my gutter line, I've got my top back. I can see some of the slope happening for here's my low point. This curb is a little bit higher than the rest. Object Viewer is definitely more of an art than a science. So it can be a little tough to check it out, but you should be seeing your rough shapes in here. And with these feature lines, I mean, this was supposed to be a really basic feature line to come down from this curb to this low point, but it has a ton of elevation points in it. And if we turn on our triangles from our resultant surface, I think I know why. Let's go to tin flow. That is too busy, just the tins. If I select my feature line, oh, hey, look at that. When it created this feature line, it also had the insert intermediate grade breakpoints turned on. So this is going to be really rigid data. I am not going to want to come in here with my quick elevation editor and go through and pop through all that stuff. So what I'm going to recommend for this resultant surface, this is a really great way to get yourself very quickly to a small number of potential design options. You can get there by changing some of the constraints of your various grading objects, of your various grading zones. But like, you know, this weird cut right here is gonna need some management. I'm gonna wanna redo that. I can simply take my feature line and go through and do some weeding of those points. Let me just grab multiple of these four. So I'll leave it up to you whether or not you want to trace them, W block them and explode them and then bring them back in as polys to reconvert. But I'm going to choose those and I'm going to give them like a really tiny weeding factor. Like I want nothing more than 100 feet long. I want to get rid of a lot of those. Almost all. And now I have a very simple feature line that I can come through and I can come back and I can insert a reasonable number of points. Or if I got to come through and manually cut some of those points out, I can. But it's going to give us the line work. It's going to give us the surface. The surface itself is a land XML. So we're not going to have all of the detailed build order. So I can't say, oh yeah, put these feature lines above those other ones. What we see is what we get. If we want that full control, we'll have to rebuild it based mostly off of our outputs from grading optimization. So from here, we iterate. And this was a little bit of an interesting tool. I had a tooltip 839, 833. So it basically gave me 2 berms to manage that fill overall. So really, I could try and find ways to minimize those out, or I could just draw a new feature line for my new stuff that keeps that flat. So it got us close. It helped us figure out which direction we overall were trying to move in, keep some of those constraints for things like our ADA zone. If I slap down a slope 1 point, oh, that did a very poor job of giving me a 2% parking area over there. So I'd have to go back and make sure that my constraints in the way that I had them set up for the grading objects was correct, and my constraints were the way that they wanted to be. But that's grading optimization. So with that, let's pop back into PowerPoint for our conclusory slide. So grading optimization. Grading optimization. What do we know? What do we think? A couple of pros I've identified in my research with this tool so far. Number one, site balance is an input. It's no longer an output. That is a huge time sink for doing iteration on these designs. We can get close, we can make guesses, but often we can be off by 1 to 5,000 cubic yards once all is said and done. So this is going to help us get there a lot faster. And it is fast. It makes it really easy to rule in or out design options and to say, hey, here's a zone, here's some general criteria, show me what you got. However, functions outside of Civil 3D. Not everybody's going to like that. Not everybody's going to remember that they need to download that thing, and they'll find it on the updates section of the manage page rather than the all products and services. The resultant surface is an XML in your drawing. This really limits your ability to manipulate it directly. You basically have to take those feature lines, retrace them, weed them, and rebuild that surface on your own once you want to make iterations to that. So they come in, they're lumped into a single site, they're not that well organized, we're cluttered up with elevation points, and the edits are cumbersome. Also, I've been playing around with this tool for a while. I really don't know how to use this to make a retaining wall or to go through and get those curb cuts really put in for us well. So if you're in that position for a site, this tool might not get you as close as you want to be. I'm not saying that it can't be done. I just haven't figured it out in my time exploring this. I've probably spent 10 to 12 hours like dedicated to working on this inside the software. So I will for sure say, though, it's worth further exploration. The best place for you to test this is on a previously completed project. That's going to give you a good reference point for where we ended up as our human brains for that whole workflow and how this tool came in. And if we can say like, oh yeah, well, we needed a retaining wall, but this tool may have given us a way to do not a retaining wall, lessons learned that we can work on for future projects. Just remember, this is a tool that is line work dependent. We have to do our 2D layout in order to use this tool, but we had to do that anyway for the rest of our 3D stuff. And it is really easy to evaluate the differences between that previous and the new solutions. So in conclusion, Civil 3D feature lines will never go out of style. We will always have a reason to understand their impact on our surfaces, and grading objects could be better than manual offsets, but they have their own headaches associated with them. Grading optimization does rely heavily on automation and on rules. Our site balance is effectively an input, and it respects one of the most impactful design challenges for our sites. Even if the final result isn't perfect, it is an efficient way to get close to a final design or to rule in or out potential design alternatives. With that, folks, I want to just go ahead and remind you that you can subscribe to ATG on all of our social media. We've got our LinkedIn page where we talk about upcoming events. We've got our YouTube page, which is the library of all of our webinars. This one should be up within a few days of recording. Always free, always available. We're trying to help you use the software better, and this is just one way that we can get back to our customers and our not customers. We don't want to hide that knowledge. So one more time, folks, thank you so much for your time. My name is Kyle Groves. You can get a hold of me at my email address below. Of course, I would love to open up some time for questions. So go ahead, type those into the Q&A panel down on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And thanks, everybody. Really appreciate your time today. No questions coming in yet, though I'll still hang out for another minute or two, see if any of those come in. Oh, Darshana, there's my email. Scroll down there for that slide, so you can go ahead and jot that down. All right, folks, last call for questions. Otherwise, I will go ahead and close the lobby in about a minute and let us all get back onto our days. All right, question. Do we know how to keep the software from connecting those curb boundaries end to end? You know what, Mark, I have not gotten that far. My hypothesis for that is if you offset that curb, maybe half a foot or whatever you want that back width to be. If you offset that and then use your offset and a couple of quick polylines at the end to close it, it may work like that. Though, yes, we can check that out. So folks, if you are looking for this recording or for other recordings for posterity, then yes, check us out on YouTube. Simply type in ATG USA and it will take you right to our channel. But I can go ahead and click that link for us all right now because you can't click that link. This is our channel. And we've got all kinds of different playlists and the rest of that stuff, but you'll find today's presentation under, and many more, under the Civil 3D playlist, which is our library going all the way back. We got a lot of our old CTC webinars on here too. A lot of the ones that they look a little dated, but they've still got some great content in them. And lots of stuff, basic Civil 3D, a couple of our promotions with our third-party tools that we resell from CTC Software, the Sim Project Suite. Fantastic collection of tools to bring some productivity back to your users. Got another question, grading optimization. Is this free with version 2020? It's included in version 2020. However, it may be accessible only for AEC collection customers. That I have to double check. So if you have the AEC collection, you for sure get access to that. Where is our knowledge page? Oh, not there. Definitely with the AEC collection, possibly with just a Civil 3D license. If anybody else knows the answer for sure for that question, let us know. Otherwise, Darshana, I can reach out to you afterward with a full answer to that question. So on the curb, what happens if we take our polyline and I'll offset that by 0.5 to the inside. Isolate this object layer so that I can lock and fade. Get out of here. Had to reinstall Civil 3D today. Off VP freeze. And you. Nope, not you. There we go. Connect that up. I don't like dynamic input either, but I can deal with that later. All right, let's go back into grading optimization. Analyze, optimize. EG is going to be inside EG. Beep, boop, beep, boop, boop. And for the curbs, oh, I lost it. Got to retag it. Optimize. All right, Mark, looks like my hypothesis was correct. If we have that curb and we go ahead and make it a closed feature, it does get rid of that weird choppy line that goes all the way around. So technically, yes, you can have your curb as a linear element. You just might not get the results that you wanted or were expecting. You might get some extra diagonal break lines running through your whole site. So if you close that, even with an interior offset or an exterior offset, I haven't evaluated this on how that actually affects the model, but if that's your goal to get rid of that diagonal line, yeah, make it a closed one and give it a nominal offset and let it rip. All right, folks, any more questions? Well, thank you so much for your time and attention today, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and call the webinar there. I appreciate you spending your time with me today. Be safe, be well. If you can, pass that on to somebody else too.